room was so silent that even the sound of Elvis Presley's footsteps seemed too loud. He slowly pushed the old wooden door open, expecting nothing more than another forgotten memory hidden inside an abandoned house. Instead, time stopped. Near the window sat an elderly woman dressed in faded blue, her trembling hands clutching a yellowed envelope as though it contained the last heartbeat of her life. A single ray of afternoon sunlight slipped through the dusty curtains, illuminating the paper. Elvis took one hesitant step forward, then another. His eyes drifted toward the signature at the bottom of the page. His breathing froze. His heart stopped beating for a single, terrifying moment. The ink had faded. The paper had aged. But the handwriting was unmistakable. It was his. The very last letter he had ever written to the only woman he had truly loved. A letter he believed had vanished forever almost 18 years earlier. His lips parted, but no words came out. The woman looked into his eyes with tears that had been waiting nearly 2 decades to fall. She whispered so softly that the silence itself seemed afraid to interrupt her. "I never left you, Elvis." A tear rolled down her cheek. "They took you away from me." The world shattered. Everything Elvis Presley believed about his own life, every lonely night, every heartbreaking love song, every memory that haunted him, suddenly became nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. The letter slipped from her trembling fingers. Elvis caught it before it touched the floor. His hands began to shake. His vision blurred. Because at that very moment, he realized the greatest mistake of his life had never been his own. Someone else had stolen 18 years from both of them. And that was only the beginning. 18 years earlier, Memphis was alive. Neon lights danced across rain-soaked streets. Crowds filled every corner, hoping to catch just one glimpse of the young man whose voice had already begun changing the world. Elvis Presley was becoming more than a singer. He was becoming history. Every concert sold out within hours. Every newspaper wanted his face. Every radio station played his songs from sunrise until midnight. Women screamed his name. Children copied his hairstyle. Photographers followed him everywhere. People believed he had everything. They were wrong. Because every night, when the applause finally faded, he returned to a hotel room that felt emptier than the stage had ever been. Fame could fill stadiums. It could never fill loneliness. One rainy afternoon, after recording a new song, Elvis dismissed his driver. "I'll walk." His bodyguards protested. Fans were gathering outside. Photographers waited across the street. But Elvis needed to breathe without cameras chasing him. He pulled the collar of his coat higher and wandered through unfamiliar streets until the city noise slowly disappeared behind him. That was when he saw her. She stood outside a small neighborhood bookstore, trying to rescue dozens of books before the rain soaked them completely. Without thinking, Elvis hurried over. Together they carried heavy boxes inside. Neither of them spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, she smiled. Not because she recognized him, because she appreciated the help. "You have good timing," she laughed. "I almost lost half the store." Elvis smiled. "So did I." She looked puzzled. "My afternoon," he explained. She laughed again. It was not the rehearsed laughter of actresses, not the nervous laughter of fans. It was genuine, warm, honest. The kind of laugh that made a tired heart remember what happiness sounded like. She still hadn't recognized him. That alone fascinated Elvis. Most conversations began with screaming, autographs, questions. This one began with silence. Her name was Eleanor. She helped her elderly father manage the bookstore after her mother passed away years earlier. She loved old novels, poetry, classical music, children who came looking for adventure stories. She spoke with kindness to everyone, even strangers, especially strangers. Elvis found himself returning the next day, then the day after that, then again. Sometimes he bought books he already owned, simply to have an excuse to stay longer. Sometimes they talked until sunset. Sometimes they walked beside the Mississippi River without saying much at all. For the first time since becoming famous, someone looked at Elvis Presley and saw only Elvis. Not the headlines, not the money, not the celebrity. Just a man trying to understand his own heart. Weeks became months. The outside world kept celebrating his success. Inside that little bookstore, none of it mattered. There was no stage, no screaming crowds, no flashing cameras, only shelves filled with old books, the smell of fresh coffee, and one woman who unknowingly healed wounds fame had never been able to touch. One evening, Eleanor asked quietly, "Does it ever become lonely?" Elvis stared out the window. "The applause?" She nodded. He smiled sadly. "The applause is the loudest sound in the world." He paused. "But loneliness is louder." She reached across the table. She gently placed her hand over his. She said nothing. She didn't need to. That simple gesture said more than thousands of interviews ever could. From that night forward, Elvis stopped imagining a future filled with bigger concerts. Instead, he imagined breakfasts, quiet mornings, books left open on the kitchen table, children laughing somewhere down the hallway, a house where nobody cared whether he sold another record. He had never wanted anything more. One autumn afternoon, they drove into the countryside. Golden leaves covered the roads. The air smelled of pine trees and fresh rain. They sat beside a peaceful lake where the water reflected clouds drifting slowly overhead. Elvis reached into his coat pocket. Inside was a tiny velvet box. He turned it over in his hand again and again. His heart raced faster than it ever had before stepping onto any stage. Eleanor. She looked toward him. He couldn't speak, not because he forgot the words, because every dream he had ever buried suddenly stood before him. He finally smiled. "I've sung in front of hundreds of thousands of people." She nodded. "I've never been this nervous." She laughed softly. That laugh gave him courage. He slowly opened the velvet box. Inside rested a delicate engagement ring. "I don't want another standing ovation." His voice trembled. "I don't want another gold record." He swallowed. "I only want a life with you." Tears immediately filled her eyes. Before she could answer, a loud engine echoed through the forest road. Several black cars appeared from nowhere. Their tires sprayed gravel into the air. Doors slammed. Men wearing dark coats stepped out. One of them shouted Elvis's name. Another rushed toward him carrying urgent papers. "There has been an emergency." Elvis frowned. "What happened?" "We need you immediately." The man's voice was calm, too calm, professional, practiced. Another man quietly picked up Elvis's travel bag while everyone else focused on the supposed emergency. No one noticed, not even Elvis. Hidden inside that bag were dozens of handwritten letters. Every letter Eleanor had ever written, every photograph, every promise, every memory. Within minutes, they were gone. Neither Elvis nor Eleanor realized that someone had just stolen far more than paper. Someone had stolen their future. And neither of them had any idea that this single moment would separate them for almost 18 years. The engagement ring never reached Eleanor's hand. By the time Elvis returned to the quiet countryside the following morning, the little bookstore was closed. The lights were off. The curtains had been drawn. The sign hanging on the front door swayed gently in the cold wind. He knocked once, twice, again. No answer. "Eleanor," he called. Silence. An elderly woman from across the street slowly stepped onto her porch. "You came too late," she said softly. "They left before sunrise." Elvis frowned. "Left?" She nodded. "The young lady said she never wanted to see you again." The words hit harder than any punch. "That's impossible." The woman looked confused. "She said you chose another woman." Elvis's heart nearly stopped. "What?" The elderly neighbor disappeared inside her house before returning with a torn newspaper. On the front page, there was a photograph. Elvis standing beside a glamorous actress at a charity gala. The headlines screamed across the page, "America's new royal couple." It had been nothing more than another publicity stunt arranged by his management. A picture, nothing else. But someone had carefully cut away every explanation beneath the headline. Only the photograph remained. Only the lie remained. Elvis stared at it. "No," he whispered. "This isn't true." He ran to the bookstore door again, pounded harder. "Eleanor!" His voice echoed through the empty street. No one answered. The bookstore that had once felt warmer than home now looked like a forgotten memory. Inside the locked window, he could still see the chair where she always read novels during quiet afternoons. Her favorite coffee cup still rested on the counter. Everything remained, except her. Hundreds of miles away, Eleanor sat alone inside a train. Rain rolled down the windows as the city slowly disappeared behind her. Her hands trembled while holding another envelope. This one wasn't written by Elvis. It had no signature. Only photographs, dozens of them. Every picture showed Elvis beside beautiful women. Movie stars, models, singers, smiling, laughing, holding hands. Someone had arranged them perfectly. There was another folded letter. She unfolded it with shaking fingers. It read, "He never intended to marry you. You were only a secret. He laughs about you. He says a bookstore girl could never belong in his world." She closed her eyes. Her chest hurt so badly she struggled to breathe. Then came the final blow. A gold engagement ring. Not the one Elvis had bought. A completely different ring. Someone had placed it inside a velvet box together with another note. "He proposed yesterday, but not to you." Her tears soaked every page. She wanted to hate him. Instead, she missed him. That somehow hurt even more. She whispered into the empty train compartment, "If you truly loved me, why didn't you come?" Outside, the train disappeared into the storm. Back in Memphis, Elvis refused to believe it. He wrote another letter, then another, then another. Every evening after recording sessions ended, he locked himself inside his room and wrote until sunrise. He apologized. He explained the newspaper photographs. He begged her to answer. He promised he would search every city if necessary. He mailed every single letter himself. Weeks passed. Nothing. Months passed. Nothing. Another year. Still nothing. His manager placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Son, I think it's time to let her go." Elvis looked at the pile of unanswered envelopes. "No. There has to be a reason. There has to be." He never knew. Every letter he mailed never reached the post office. His longtime manager quietly collected them before anyone else could, locked them inside his office safe, then smiled as though nothing had happened. Time moved forward. The world celebrated Elvis Presley. His records shattered sales numbers. Concert tickets disappeared within minutes. Hollywood called. Television invited him everywhere. Millions believed he was living the perfect dream. Only Elvis knew the truth. Every standing ovation reminded him of the one person who had never applauded because she simply loved listening. Every autograph reminded him of the one name he wanted to write forever. Every hotel room reminded him of the small bookstore where life had once felt real. Interviewers constantly asked the same question. "Elvis, when will you settle down?" He always smiled politely. "When the right time comes." No one noticed the sadness behind that smile, because the right time had already come, and someone had stolen it. Years passed. The world changed. Music changed. Fashion changed. Entire generations grew up listening to Elvis Presley. But every concert followed the same quiet ritual. Before stepping onto the stage, he opened a worn leather wallet. Inside was a tiny photograph. Eleanor standing outside the bookstore with a stack of novels in her arms. The edges of the picture had become soft from years of being touched. He looked at it before every performance, without fail, then slipped it back into his pocket. Only then could he sing. Fans believed songs like Love Me Tender and Can't Help Falling in Love were simply beautiful love songs. They were wrong. Every lyric carried the name he never spoke aloud. Every note was another letter that never reached its destination. Night after night, millions applauded. Yet when the lights went out, he still whispered the same name into the darkness. Eleanor. Meanwhile, in another town, life had become far more difficult. Eleanor discovered she was expecting a child. She sat alone in a doctor's office, staring at the floor while the physician gently smiled. "Congratulations. You're going to be a mother." Instead of smiling, she cried. Not because she didn't want the baby, because she believed the child's father had abandoned them both. Friends urged her to forget him. Her relatives begged her to start over. Some even suggested she should never tell the child who her father was. But Eleanor refused. "No. He may have broken my heart." She rested a trembling hand on her stomach. "But our child deserves to know that somewhere in this world, there was once a man who made me believe in forever." She never remarried. She never stopped wearing the small necklace Elvis had once given her. She never stopped listening whenever one of his songs played on the radio. Sometimes, late at night, she would quietly turn the volume higher, rest her hand on her growing belly, and whisper, "Listen carefully. That's your father singing." The little girl would kick gently every single time. Eleanor always smiled through her tears. Years flowed by like pages carried away by the wind. The little girl grew into a bright, compassionate child. She loved books. She loved music. She loved helping people. Whenever other children asked who her father was, she simply smiled. "My mother says he's someone who once made the whole world smile." She never asked why he wasn't there. She believed there had to be a reason. Every birthday, she secretly left one empty chair beside the cake, just in case. One day, he might finally come home. Thousands of miles away, on that very same birthday, without knowing why, Elvis suddenly stopped in the middle of a recording session. A strange sadness overwhelmed him. He stared through the studio window for several long moments. One of the musicians asked quietly, "Everything all right, Elvis?" He forced a smile. "I don't know." He placed a hand over his heart. "It feels like someone important is waiting for me." He had no idea. Someone truly was. And she had been waiting her entire life. 18 years later. The funeral ended beneath a gray autumn sky. Only a handful of people stood around the freshly closed grave. Among them was the man who had managed Elvis Presley's career for almost 2 decades. His face showed no emotion, no grief, only silence. As the mourners slowly walked away, an elderly lawyer approached Elvis and handed him a small brass key. "There was one instruction in his will," the lawyer said quietly. "He wanted you to receive this after his death." Elvis looked down at the key. "What is it for?" "The private safe in his office." A strange feeling settled deep inside his chest. For reasons he could not explain, he was afraid to open it. The office looked exactly as it had years before. The same polished desk, the same heavy curtains, the same expensive furniture. It felt as though time itself had refused to move. Elvis walked toward the steel safe standing against the wall. His hand trembled as he inserted the key. The lock clicked. The thick metal door slowly opened. Inside, there was no money, no contracts, no jewelry, only hundreds of unopened letters tied together with faded ribbons. Every envelope carried the same handwriting, his own. Others carried another familiar handwriting, Eleanor's. Elvis's knees nearly gave way. "No," he whispered. "No." With shaking hands, he opened the first envelope. "My dearest Eleanor, if I have done something to hurt you, please tell me. I cannot lose you without knowing why." It had never been mailed. He opened another. "My love, I came back to the bookstore every day. Please don't disappear without letting me explain." Another. 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 None of them had ever left the office. Then he picked up one written by Eleanor. "My beloved Elvis, I don't believe the newspapers. Please tell me the truth. I will wait." Another. "I still love you." Another. "I know there must be some mistake." Then, the letters changed. Her handwriting became weaker, the ink blurred by tears. "Today I learned that I am carrying your child." Elvis stopped breathing. His fingers froze around the paper. Another letter. Our daughter smiled today. Another. She asked me why her father never comes home. Another. I still cannot hate you. Tears fell onto the pages faster than he could wipe them away. Every single letter, every cry for help, every chance to return, had been hidden inside this safe. Someone had stolen 18 years with nothing more than a lock and a lie. At the bottom of the safe rested several old cassette tapes. One was carefully labeled, "For Elvis, if he ever comes back." Elvis placed the tape inside an old recorder. Static filled the room. Then, a familiar voice. Soft, fragile, broken. "Elvis." Several seconds passed before she could continue. "I don't know if you'll ever hear this. I don't know if you stopped loving me. I don't even know if you're alive." She began crying. "I just wanted you to know. Our little girl is beautiful. She has your smile. She laughs exactly the way you do. I tell her every night that her father sings to the whole world. I pray that one day you'll sing for her too." The recording ended with quiet sobbing. Elvis collapsed onto the floor. The recorder continued spinning, but he heard nothing else. For the first time in his life, the king of rock and roll wept like a helpless child. There was still one final envelope inside the safe. Unlike the others, it had never been opened. Inside, a small photograph slipped into Elvis's hands. A little girl stood beside a birthday cake. She could not have been older than 6. She wore a bright white dress. Her smile looked painfully familiar. On the back of the picture, Eleanor had written only one sentence. She asks every birthday if today will be the day her daddy comes. Another paper fell onto the floor. It was a birth certificate. Father, Elvis Aaron Presley. His entire body went numb. He had a daughter who had lived 18 years believing her father had chosen fame over her. A daughter who had never truly been abandoned, only stolen from him. Elvis left that office before sunrise. He drove for hours without stopping, past empty highways, small towns, old churches, fields glowing beneath the morning sun. Finally, he arrived at a quiet white house surrounded by tall oak trees. His heartbeat echoed inside his ears. He slowly knocked. The door opened. There she was, Eleanor. Older, her hair touched by silver. The years had carved sadness into her face. For several endless seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she raised the yellowed letter he had written almost 18 years before. I kept it. Elvis could no longer hold back his tears. I'm sorry. She gently shook her head. You have nothing to apologize for. They made sure we never found each other. The years between them disappeared, not because the pain vanished, because the truth finally arrived. They spent hours talking, laughing through tears, remembering forgotten dreams, apologizing for mistakes neither of them had ever made. As evening approached, Elvis whispered the question he feared most. Our daughter. May I finally meet her? Eleanor looked away. Her lips trembled. Without saying a word, she pointed toward a framed photograph hanging on the wall. A young woman wearing a doctor's coat smiled, while kneeling beside several sick children in a hospital. Elvis smiled through tears. "She's beautiful." Eleanor nodded proudly. She became the kind of person who heals broken hearts, just like her father healed people with music. Hope filled Elvis's eyes for the first time in almost 2 decades. "I want to see her. I want to tell her everything. I want to hold her. I want—" Eleanor slowly reached across the table. She handed him an old newspaper clipping. His smile disappeared. The headline read, "Beloved children's doctor dies in tragic automobile accident." His eyes moved to the date. 3 days earlier. Only 3 days. 3 days. After waiting her entire life. He had arrived 3 days too late. The newspaper slipped from his hands. He could not breathe. He could not speak. He simply stood there, broken. Eleanor quietly led him upstairs. This was her room. Everything remained exactly as she had left it. Medical textbooks filled the shelves. Childhood photographs covered the walls. Old vinyl records sat beside a record player. Every Elvis Presley album, carefully protected. Concert ticket stubs, magazine clippings, newspaper interviews. She had collected them all. Not because he was famous, because he was her father. On her desk rested a neatly wrapped gift. A small handwritten note lay on top. "For my first meeting with Dad." Elvis slowly untied the ribbon. Inside, he found an old guitar pick, the very one he had lost during a concert almost 20 years earlier. Beside it rested a folded letter. His hands shook so violently he could barely unfold it. "Dad, if you're reading this, then maybe miracles really do happen. Mom always told me you loved us. I believed her. People said you forgot us. I never believed them. I wanted only one thing in my whole life. Not your fame, not your money, not your name. Just one hug. If we meet someday, please don't apologize. Just smile. Because I already forgave you before we ever met. I love you. Your daughter." Elvis pressed the letter against his heart. A sound escaped his lips unlike anything the world had ever heard. It was not a song. It was grief. Pure, silent, endless. Several weeks later, the lights inside the arena dimmed. More than 20,000 people rose to their feet. The applause thundered through the stadium. "Elvis! Elvis! Elvis!" He slowly walked onto the stage. For the first time, he carried no smile, no confident wave, only a folded letter resting inside his jacket. The orchestra waited. The audience grew silent. Elvis reached into his pocket. He removed his daughter's letter. He pressed it gently against his heart. Tears filled his eyes. Then he looked toward the heavens, almost as if someone were sitting in the front row, listening, waiting. He began to sing. Every word, every note, every breath was no longer for the millions inside the arena. It was for one daughter who had waited her entire life to hear her father sing only to her. When the final note faded, the audience exploded into applause. But Elvis did not bow. He simply closed his eyes, holding the letter against his heart. Some victories arrive too late. Some reunions never happen. Some letters spend years searching for the person they were always meant to find. The screen slowly faded to black. One final sentence appeared. Some letters arrive too late, but the love inside them never loses its way.